Yeah? Amazing. Sorry, Derek, I didn't get this set up for yours. Alright. Is that still working? Alright, how's everybody doing? Good. Yeah. I'm here to talk about Font Family Reunion, which is a tool I built to show you cross-browser and cross-operating system compatibility tables for default fonts on operating systems. Sweet fire animation. You guys probably know. So, Font Family Reunion kind of started because I did a stupid, completely uninspired project for my blog. I decided I wanted to redesign if you go to a W3C specification, you'll see the kind of the iconic banner on the left, and those are all raster images. So I was like, hey, I should do this and redo them and make them retina friendly using just CSS. So I did. So I put it on my blog. And actually some people from the W3C actually saw this project and they were like, hey, yeah, we should maybe use this, which was totally awesome. So that's in process right now. But a side note to that was their first piece of feedback was, how well supported is the Gil Sans font on the banner? Because I'm just using raw CSS with the default Gil Sans font. And theirs, they were using a raster image, which doesn't require a local font at all. So, one of the other things about the banners, they already had them in SVG, unbeknownst to me at the time. But the total size of all the different banners was about 98 kilobyte gzipped, which is not good. And the total size of the CSS file that I generated with all of the different banners in them was just half a kilobyte gzip. So as I mentioned, their first piece of feedback was how well supported is that font, or will we have to do something else to embed a web font into the system? So that begets the question, how do you know if a font is available on different operating systems? So, taking another side, sort of diversion to a different side project that I worked on called BIGTEXT in 2001. It was a jQuery plugin which will take different lines of text and size them to make them look like they take the same horizontal space. So it just takes raw text and sizes them horizontally with JavaScript. And one of the first pieces of feedback I got after releasing this plugin was, why doesn't it work with my web font? So for example, when you have a web font that goes out and asynchronously fetches your font file, when the JavaScript runs and the web font isn't available, it doesn't understand the metrics that it needs to appropriately size the text. Maybe I could give you actually a better demo of that to show you kind of how it works. So I built this wizard that's not my name, I can type my name. Just kind of show you how it works. You can type whatever you want in here, and it actually does some cool things with CSS transforms. It does it generates a random CSS transform. Then I have a shortcut to erase everything, so I can quickly type whatever I want in here. That has another kind of cool one that inverts the, I don't know, this is all just pointless, but anyway. So back from it. So that's what BigText does. And so the text needs to be in its final form, I guess, before it can be sized appropriately. So one of the tools that you can use to sort of get an event to know when a web font has loaded successfully is the web font loader from Typekit. And it will actually trigger a callback that you can use to say, hey, this text is ready. I can use BIGTEXT on it to size it appropriately. And it's about 7 kilobyte of JavaScript. Gzip. So I actually stripped out the code, because there's a ton of code in Web Font Loader that is kind of unrelated to this project, and I just wanted that one little piece of it. So I actually just stripped that out and made my own project called Font Face Onload. Reduced the size down to about 1.5 kilobyte. This is kind of the syntax for that. You feed it a font family name, and you get a success callback. And the way that works behind the scenes is it actually creates 2 different divs. These are positioned on screen, but normally they're positioned off screen. And it measures the size of the div. So the top div is Railway, which is our font face web font. The fallback is sans serif. And then the bottom div is Railway serif with the serif fallback. So it measures each of these, the dimensions of each of these divs. And when the web font pops in, the dimensions have changed. So you can see this, I don't know if you can see the red square, but that's the original dimensions of the element. The green depicts the new dimensions of the element after our new font face is loaded. So when the text dimensions change, we know the font has loaded successfully. And of course, this is all sort of a really hacky way to know when a font has loaded successfully. So there's actually native APIs to do this now, available in Chrome and Opera. It's called the CSS font loading spec. And this is the syntax for that. So you can feed it a font size and a font family, and it will use the promises spec to let you feed in a callback function there. And actually, I've modified Font Face Onload to use this when it's available as well. So you can still use Font Face Onload, and it will work cross-browser, and it will use this native API when it's available. And if you've been keeping track with my employer filament group, we released this feature test for WAF2, which is a new font format, and it also uses this same CSS font loading native specification. Just kind of another side note. So, getting back to Font Family I/O, I use Font Face Onload to check if a local font is available. So I will feed it Arial, comma, serif, Arial, comma, sans serif, and if the dimensions are different than the fallback dimensions, then I know the local font is available. But that begets the question, how do I know what font families to feed into the system? So I actually had to compile a giant list of local default fonts that are available on every single operating system. There's a couple of different tools I use to do that. Apple and Microsoft publish all of the default fonts for all of their operating systems online. So this is an example of one of Apple's. So I wrote scripts in the console to parse this text out and make a giant JSON array with all of these font family names. Here's just a list of some other sources that I use. If you're on Unix, there's this nice fclist command that you can use to get a list of all the locally installed fonts. So I ended up with this big giant list of about 1,200 fonts, and the tool actually runs through every single one of these every time I run the test script. So I test each one of those font family names individually. And I also test to see if each one of those font family names matches one of the default CSS keywords. So there's 5 default CSS keywords built into CSS. Serif, sans serif, monospace, and my favorite, font family fantasy, amazing, and cursive. So here's kind of what my test script looks like for Font Family I/O. This isn't really published online. Well, the code is available, but this isn't part of the fontfamily.io website. This is just the local test that I use. So it runs through each one of those and puts, makes an array of all the ones that are supported, puts that into a text area. It also lists all the different fonts that may match default CSS keywords. So for example, on Mac OS and Chrome, you can kind of see in the test script, it shows you times here and Times New Roman. So on Mac OS, there are actually two different fonts. You can see here that I've overlaid them with the default text, so you can see if there's a difference here. It shows you that it's not the same. So initial font family means no font family specified for these divs. So Times is the default when you don't specify a font family in your CSS. And kind of the same thing for sans serif. You can see that Arial and Helvetica are different fonts. Since Helvetica is the default here, you can kind of see Helvetica is overlaid differently than Arial. And that's different on Windows. Windows, they just alias them straight up. They don't have different versions. Probably because they didn't want to pay the royalties to Apple. And I also have a little MongoDB server running to easily retrieve the results from mobile devices. Since I don't have clipboard support, I can't copy the text from that text area on my text on this test script. So I wrote a little code that would log those to MongoDB for me. So a little bit more about CSS font family while I'm into it. You can use unquoted font family names almost all the time. If you want to read more about that, you can go to the ISIS website. He has a lot of great notes about it, and even has a font family checker for you if you're unsure if you have to use quotes or not. But usually, unquoted font family names are fine, even if they have white space. That's okay. But quoted default CSS family name keywords are different than unquoted. So, for example, if I have font family quote serif is not the same as font family unquoted serif. And font families are not case sensitive. A few limitations of the site, it's less reliable with fonts that don't map ASCII characters. So for example, internationalization characters that are not in the lower code points, symbol fonts, it's less reliable with those. And so back to font family O, then I have a small node script that takes all the results from all the test scripts that I've run on a bunch of different devices, and it statically generates fontfamily.io, the website. This is like 4 different stages of building this project. One was the test script, the last one is the actual website. So this is what it looks like. It's just amazing, amazingly beautiful. You type in a font family name into the giant text box, and it shows you the results, and I'll show you that in a little bit. I don't want to go through the internals of how the actual front end of the website works too much, but a couple of things that I'm kind of proud of is the clean URLs. It doesn't use a query string up there. Just the URLs are really kind of nice. I used replace state to modify the URL to make it a little bit cleaner. And I have a tiny PHP backend that handles any font family combination. So you can type in any number of font family names into that text box, and the system will handle it for you. And I didn't actually statically generate every single combination of font family names. That would have been ridiculous. So a couple of neat or sort of interesting tidbits that I learned by running the test scripts is that when you don't specify a font family, most browsers will use the serif default. But for some reason, IE9 and IE10, not in IE8 or not in IE11, they use this Batang font, which is, I believe, a Chinese character font. It does still have the normal ASCII characters, but it just looks a little bit different than Times New Roman. I don't know why they did this. I assume it was a mistake on their part, but it was corrected eventually. I had to throw this. So yeah, my personal favorite font family, Fantasy. Amazing. On Windows, it is unbelievably inconsistent across browsers. So There is no font family fantasy on IE8, but in Chrome and Opera it's Impact, which is way different. If you're familiar with the Impact font, it's used on a lot of memes. It's way different than Papyrus, which is the Mac OS and iOS default, as you can see down here. So if you're looking for stylistic consistency, you might not want to use font family fantasy. It's all over the place. And cursive is kind of the same way. On Windows, it's Comic Sans, which is everyone's favorite font. But on iOS and Mac, or I should say on Mac desktop, it's Apple Chancery. I don't even know how to pronounce that. And on iOS, it's like these scripty fonts. So it's completely different than Comic Sans, which is, I don't know, you can say that's good or say that's bad. I won't say either.
I heard a suggestion once that you should set the last font in your callback to Comic Sans so that you know when your fonts don't load.
Yeah, that's one approach you can take. You could also use Comic Sans as your free version, and I've seen that used on some desktop software. And when you buy a Pro account, you'll upgrade them to a nice Arial. So the takeaways, I guess, serif, sans serif, and monospace are safe to use. Feel free with using them. Always specify a fallback when you're using a web font, or a remote web font, I should say. And those three are fine to use. But back to our original question, how well supported is Gil Sans? Not great. So yeah, it's available on iOS and Mac, but not really anywhere else. Android doesn't have it, Windows Phone doesn't have it, Windows Desktop doesn't have it, and Ubuntu and Fedora Linux don't have it. So I guess W3C is out of luck. Sad. No, they'll probably just specify a different, similar default font, or they'll use a web font, which will sort of negate some of the size benefits that they got from using the CSS-only approach, but that's if they even end up using it at the end of the day. They're reviewing it right now, so we'll see if it even happens or not, but maybe. So one thing that I did want to say kind of at the end is that this entire whole system of code was just written sort of in my spare time and as side projects. So you could kind of see that in 2011 I worked on BIGTEXT, and then earlier this year I did those W3C banners, and then that sort of snowballed into the Font Family IO project. And so I would encourage everyone to do side projects, because you never know what you'll learn from just sort of going out on your own and trying something out. And you never really know where it will take you. Maybe it will take you to writing code for the W3C, if that's something that you want to do. Some would say that that's a bad thing, but so yeah, that's all I have. Thank you.